Hey guys, thank you very much for joining us this week for the Mayor's Brief. We're going to review the meeting from April 13th, and with me I have a very special guest. That's Councilman Lige Daughtridge from Ward 5. How you doing, Lige?
Fine, Mayor. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I really appreciate you taking the time going out here and talking to us about the meeting, and would love to hear some of your thoughts.
Well, I mean, like you, I'm new to the whole thing, so each meeting's new and has to offer something different. We had a pretty big agenda. I'm sure you're going to go through it and ask some questions, but had a lot of things on there and a few things I voted against. Not necessarily against the actual items on there, but had some concerns with them. So,
well, let's just talk about that. I know that we had two items on the agenda that we removed, or that we were going to remove, items 20 and 21. We can talk about that. We did remove item 17 for consideration, and then there was some robust debate on a number of issues and points. And so, I really wanted to talk to you about, kind of your thoughts on those issues, where you were thinking, where your head was, and just generally speaking, where you think we ought to be headed as a city of Rocky Mount.
Sure. Well, the items 20 and 21, which 20 was about the building assistance program.
That's right.
And then 21 was about the residential facade. The 20 about my concerns with them are not necessarily helping people or businesses, and they're really focused for downtown. And as a small business owner located in downtown, I'm certainly an advocate of that.
Sure.
In fact, I go to church right off of on Church and Main Street over there, so have a affiliation for Main Street. But I think the concern really comes through is I do a lot of reading, and I've been reading. One of the great things about becoming the city council, and you've learned this, is the UNC School of Government. They do a great job and a lot of guidance, not only to you and me and council members and people in leadership and government, but also to the staff, such as Pam Casey, who's the city clerk, city manager Rochelle Small-Toney. They give a lot of good advice. And I've been reading about some grants because I've had concerns about them. And some of the concerns I have are can we really do these grants? And I came across, and there's some questions within the state constitution. I do a better job of reading this, but this is from a guy from the UNC School of Government, Tyler Mulligan, who has written a piece and states that when state constitutions across the nation were written, they included gift clauses to ensure that states and local governments did not make gifts to private entities, and which includes facade grants and
Sure.
to nonprofits.
Well, let's talk about private entities. I mean, we're talking about individuals. We're talking about also corporations because they're considered individuals under the law. And so I guess the idea there is that we're looking for we just don't want a conflict of interest.
Right.
And so we're not looking for any one individual to benefit on behalf of the public interest. Right.
I mean, it's not. You don't expect the public to pay for my business, and I don't expect the public to pay for my business. And the same thing's similar here. One option that
public tax dollars.
You
do want the public paying for it, right?
Sure. But would it be better for the city to offer some lending to people downtown or other parts of the area where banks typically wouldn't do that because it might be a little riskier? So do some mezzanine type financing. So that's where I was coming from really with that. And the fact that we tend to give grants to the nonprofits, which I'm all for nonprofits, and helping because they do a lot of good.
Sure.
Like came up last night, my
Sure.
sister's house does great work throughout the community.
Sure.
The Bassett Center and places
Sure,
like that.
Sure, and I'm familiar with Ripple folks. I mean, I've given the Boys and Girls Club. I mean, I personally have given to a lot of these charities as well because I do think they're doing a great job.
Oh, sure.
And I'm great with the city providing, if we have surplus in our budget and that we can afford to do so, to be able to provide that because we have a lot of in our population that simply can't afford or do for themselves, and it's unfortunate, but we've got to look out to the least among us as well. So I think that context should brought into some of these conversations that you're having too.
Oh, sure, but you're also talking to a guy who helped start a nonprofit that funded Reach Out Rocky Mount. We funded numerous nonprofits in Rocky Mount in over 5 years, raised over $2 million. So it's not that I'm against that, but
Well,
I think
that's important
Right.
to talk about. The other thing I think is important when you were talking about these grants is you were raising an issue on the constitutionality
Correct.
of the grant, whether or not that's even permissible under the law, which is a higher level of discussion.
Right.
And so I think one of the counters was, well, look, I mean, it's being done all over the state, many different municipalities. I don't know why this would be a problem. And so, I think that was sort of the core of the debate. And you were clearly in the minority.
Sure.
You voted against it. I think maybe somebody else voted against it as well. I'm not sure.
I can't remember.
But I think that's important to let you talk a little bit about that constitutionality, right? And to really highlight those points because, while seemingly subtle, very significant in
Right.
terms of how a city does business.
Right, and the gift clause is there, and really, I would have preferred for this to have been tabled.
Right.
And my choice for it to be tabled is to have the opportunity to consult with the city attorney, maybe with the School of Government, bring in the Department of Commerce, and said, okay, are we on the right track?
Sure.
And then if we get the A-OK from everyone, then maybe we can consider this and go down that road. But really, the constitutionality of it is certainly a concern, and we've got to make sure we do it right because we're using taxpayer dollars.
Sure.
And with the pandemic that we're in right now, the other piece that we have to worry about is our budget.
Sure.
And so hopefully. In fact, this morning I sent an email to remind the city attorney to check into
Right.
it, and I trust that he will and get back to us, and
Sure.
and then we can get down the road for that as well. But
Right. Of course, and he's not in and of himself the judge of this, right?
No.
But he is the one who advises us as a city, specifically city council, on matters where maybe this is something we ought to take to another level of discussion.
Right.
And you mentioned the UNC School of Government, and I tell you, that is a fantastic program. And the interpretation that they bring and the assistance they bring to really part-time councils. I mean, that's what we are. It's not a professional job, and it's hard to know everything there is to know all the time.
yeah, no, I agree with you, Mayor. And the other thing that I think another avenue we could have gone down is discuss this in the committee of the whole.
Sure.
And we could have had the same discussion and maybe had some of these questions answered prior to coming into the city council meeting.
Sure.
And I would like to have seen that done differently. Because also this in 2020, this Tyler Mulligan also wrote, and I think it's important for context, the North Carolina Constitution allows governments to grant cash or property to individuals or businesses for private development only in very limited circumstances, such as affordable housing for low-income persons or to provide business location incentives when necessary to attract jobs from, say, a different state, say Virginia or from California, to locate here. So there's some context where we can do that. We just got to make sure we're doing it properly. And that's part of a job as a city council person, is you've got to make sure that you're spending the money properly and in a legal manner. And that's where some of my concerns came from.
Right, sure. So, I guess it's all about providing checks and balances in that whole process too. And so I don't know if there's anything there you want to speak to, but I think that really is the context that you were bringing forth,
Right.
Those thought process. So I guess it'll be interesting to see what the city attorney comes back with over the next couple of days and weeks, to kind of talk about that.
Yeah.
So there are a number of other issues that we went through. Obviously, we talked about, the presentation from the city manager. She went over a couple of items. But one of the items that we removed too was item 17, which really dealt with collections. And so there wasn't really a whole lot of discussion on that. I think everybody just accepted the fact that we were going to remove that from the schedule of events. Don't know if you had any thoughts about that you want to talk about, or if that's anything else in the agenda that you feel like is important for us to discuss for our citizenry here.
Yeah, well, really the collections, it was removed the city manager did remove that. And that needs to come to the committee of the whole, in my opinion, as well, so we can have discussion on that, because the collections, what she's referring to is anybody that's unpaid debt, whether it's utilities or whether it's property taxes, we send to a collection agency, and that's typical within a business. I don't think that's unheard of, but we have a full service city here in Rocky Mount.
Right.
Everything from collecting trash and taxes to supplying people with water and sewer and everything else. So really,
so it's not that it's inappropriate. It's just, is that the best way or the best recourse or the best direction for the city?
Possibly with utilities. I think after a while you might need to do that because the only recourse we have is really to cut people's power off or not to renew. And right now, actually during the pandemic, we don't have the option of doing that. Which I did ask, by the way, is when we passed the no cutoff earlier, I requested from the manager that we receive the information on past due accounts to make sure that we're not, going to get in financial trouble. But really, I think we need to discuss how we're going to collect on property taxes. Because if we turn it over, as I understand it, if we turn that collection over for property taxes, unpaid property taxes to a collection agency, we're limited on the recourse that we have on collections. So essentially we'll get pennies on the dollars of what we rightfully are owed as a government. And that's part of that's the biggest part that pays our services here in Rocky Mount or any municipality generally. And it takes away other opportunities. So we ought to explore the foreclosure piece because in a foreclosure piece, it also makes the taxpayer and the citizen whole because if we're able to sell that property again, we could sell it with some covenants, one, and two, we could also get all the fees and our unpaid property taxes back and to make the citizen and the taxpayer whole again.
So one of the things, debates I've heard on that is, do we really want to be in the property management business? And I think clearly, well, probably not, but then control of the real estate, be able to sell it for development can matter. There's some governmental entities that will actually allow a private individual to pay the taxes and thus have that first right on the property to be able to foreclose if they should so choose to do so, which gets the municipality, in this case, the money and allows the private individual to deal with how to dispose of the real estate or how to deal with that particular debt. Didn't know if you had any thoughts about that as an approach, and I just mentioned that because it's just another one of those approaches to it. I don't know that I have an opinion on what's right or what's wrong, but or what's better or what's worse, but nonetheless, collection does matter.
It does matter. And because the other piece that we've got to think about is each one of us who have property, it's our responsibility to pay those property taxes. And is it going to be fair to any one property taxpayer who pays 100% of their property tax on time and then have someone that does not pay property taxes and only pay a percentage of it because they settled with it and still get to keep the property? To the example that you gave, I don't think I'm honed in on one particular avenue of anything. I'd like to explore. I'd like to keep everything open because I like the flexibility that we would have as a city because we have to do what's in the best interest of the city. And I do agree, we do not want to be in the property business. That is not what we do. But I think that we're in an environment where we need to look at that, and there's also ways to dispose of property and make the taxpayer whole again. But the other piece is, I guess I'm repeating myself, going back to just making the taxpayer whole and doing what's right. And one thing that we don't know, and we need to know, and I think there's been a couple of people that have come in front of the council just this year asking the question. I know one particular lady has, and is how much unpaid property taxes do we have in the city of Rocky Mount?
Well, I was going to mention that actually at the conclusion of your thought, because I call that an individual because she had put a lot of work into this. I mean, spreadsheet. I bet you it included 100, if not 200 different properties, complete with graphs, number of years of outstanding taxes. A graph of how much, both in Nash and in Edgecombe County, and really had just committed herself to doing a lot of the research. And we spoke for probably about an hour and a half. I went through the information because I was like, well, I'm just curious now, how do we pull together this information and really know it? Now, in her particular case, I thought was interesting. I asked what the motivation was. She said, I just love the beautiful houses and I want to see them be saved. And so the 100 or 150 houses that she had picked in Nash and Edgecombe County were really just old districts that were just beautiful homes and just felt like they needed to be transitioned to somebody who would love on them, so to speak. But it was an interesting exercise that she was going through. I noticed in many of them, taxes hadn't been paid in 13, 14, 15
Wow.
years, which I thought was significant. And I took the opportunity to go drive by. Now, this is all anecdotal. I mean, this did happen, but I can't vouch for all 150 properties. I didn't drive through all of that. But many of them were in states of disrepair. And so I thought that was interesting for several reasons. One, we hadn't paid the taxes in 13 years. That suggests to me that the owner either doesn't believe they're commercially viable, or they don't have the money, or they don't care about the property, or perhaps a little bit of all the above. Yet the majority of the houses, at least on this list, were eligible for tax credits, both state and national, just because of the age of the property. They, more often than not, were sitting in an opportunity zone, which create yet another potential tax opportunity. And then, so I'm looking at this. So the city's owed money. We have a property that has every opportunity to be incentivized to be restored to a new level that could create yet another rebasing of the tax, repricing on that to the benefit of the city. And it would beautify the community significantly. So anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in on your thought, but that was interesting to me. So I've been spending time, and of course we've spent a lot of time on COVID-19, which has derailed a lot of initiatives and thoughts. But I was trying to figure out, how do I go through the MIS system and automate, that information so that we can really have a full catalog of what's owed, what's not owed, what collection should be. Are there opportunities to find developers within our community to go back and do some redevelopment? I know that often what happens is we start talking about gentrification, we start having these conversations, but there are a number of things that we could do as a community to, not push out, Miss May or, Miss Georgia or Miss, Smith, who've been in this house for, 60 and 70 years. And, typically what happens is the price of the land goes up, which creates the increase in the tax, which means that, they get pushed out because they simply can't afford it. But there are a number of things we can do as a city council to abate taxes, to create community foundations, to create other vehicles to prevent pushing out those who've been in that neighborhood for a long time. Yet also be able to experience the appreciation that occurs, whether it's them personally or whether it's their heirs going forward. So, I think a holistic plan with a little bit of thought out process could add into that redevelopment conversation a little bit. And that's a long way from collection. I don't know how we ended up on item 17, and I ended up in a whole conversation about opportunity zones, although I was just, I guess, passionate about it,
Well, everything you said makes sense. And just to add what you're saying about not only beautifying the neighborhood, but it also will make the neighborhood safer.
Sure.
Because the blight's not there typically when it goes to a property that taxes haven't been paid on. Typically, the maintenance hasn't been kept up on it as well.
Right.
So, which could lead to crime, and likely does. And so,
there's certainly a psychology associated with it. If I'm living in an area that's run down and boarded up, I mean, there's certainly a psychology there. I don't care as much about my surroundings as I could otherwise.
So we have an opportunity as a council and mayor to go through and make some positive change in those areas. And I think we need to focus on that.
So is there anything else from the meeting last night that kind of sticks out in your head that you feel like we ought to talk about that I haven't covered here?
Well, there was and I forget which, it was beginning in the meeting, it had to deal with the electrical code.
Okay, yes.
And it was on downtown. And actually, I believe Councilwoman Miller and I had the concerns, and really the concern came down is basis of the safety.
Sure.
The code is to the North Carolina code, fire code. Our code that we have or had was a little more, required a little more for the downtown buildings, which meant running the wire through conduit or, and I don't know all the technical terms to it, but it's more for the commercial use. But we've got to remember that our downtown, usually on the bottom floor is going to be retail or business, and then the upper floors are usually what we're trying to do is get residents and get people downtown. The concern I have is those buildings are old, they're right next to each other. They're the brick facades, but in the interior is wooden.
Right.
So what's going to happen? It's if it catches fire, someone's going to be stuck up in the upper floor and be trapped. Is it going to cause fire to spread throughout the entire building? There's a lot of just safety concerns. And the question is, why are you going to reduce your rules and regulation when it seems like if they're there, let's go with them. Now, I did this morning receive a call from a contractor who's building downtown that tried to explain a little bit to me, and it made me feel a little better that they're putting in some fire suppression and so forth in there. But I still question why we're going to reduce the requirements down there, and we're reducing our whole fire district, main fire district in Rocky Mount. And the other thing that didn't come up last night, but what is that going to have ultimately to do with the rates that we pay on our insurance?
Right. There's so many things that do factor into that, but code is one of the critical components as it relates to that. Now, I've been on both sides of that issue, right? I have developed properties and certainly would like a lesser code if I could, but you're right. I didn't feel like that it was adequately explained prior to, so I really don't feel like I have an understanding. Now, as we know, I don't have a vote unless there's a tie. I did ask some questions, but I really still don't understand what that means, other than we have, become one with the state fire code, because we couldn't go any lower than that. It's not even an option.
No, it's not.
And I'm not sure what we did away with, other than it's just rare that you do that.
Right.
So I'm with you. That's just interesting, and of course, you and Councilman Miller had spent a lot more time on that than I had on the issue. So I think that's great that you bring that up, and it is interesting.
Yeah, and I think you alluded to it, but like you, well, I won't say like you. I'm a person who likes less government intrusion.
Right.
But I do think that some of the basics of government is for the protection and safety of the citizens.
Sure.
Which includes this.
Sure.
So that factored into my decision.
Sure. And also, and maybe that's even the case, it just wasn't explained in a way that, that I think anybody could readily have walked away going, I feel great about that. Right. So anyway.
Yeah.
So anything else you can think of from last night's meeting?
I don't think so, Mayor. I just, it's there's a lot that went on. We did, well, one thing that came up is we're adding pedestrian signals on part of Sunset.
Right.
I think near Taylor Street and some other streets. There's a lot of emphasis that's placed on downtown and certain parts of Rocky Mount, the surrounding neighborhoods, which I think is great, and we should, but we can't forget the other parts of Rocky Mount. And it's a safety concern. And I brought up the example of Ward 5. In Ward 5, we don't have a grocery store in Ward 5, and we have Little Eastonburg, where a lot of people who do not have access to transportation have to walk down Sunset Avenue, and it's dangerous. In fact, I live off of Sunset Avenue, and just across it, which my wife and I did this past weekend, I mean, you're taking your life in your own hands. And I would like to see sidewalks and pedestrian signals move further west as well. And then I also mentioned the area around the mall and the Chick-fil-A and Walmart, and then that Zaxby's over there. There is a lot of pedestrian traffic, and there are no sidewalks, and there are no pedestrian signals there. And I'm afraid that we're going to have an accident one day that could be avoided if we had something there. And Councilman Bullock did raise a good point that Sunset Avenue is a state road.
Right.
But it's just like with litter and other things within Rocky Mount, even though it may not be the responsibility of the city, it's still the city.
Right.
So could we take funds and allocate it for the safety and well-being of the community?
Right. So maybe we just need to ask for some studies to find out how many what the traffic count is by Zaxby's and these other areas, and Man, offhand, I would have to guess is a big number. I do happen to know Sunset. Around Daughtridge, it's about 30,000 cars a day.
Wow.
And then when you go to the City Lake, it's approximately 10,000 cars a day. Don't ask me why I know that. I had some reason to look at it. I do remember when I was campaigning, I was trying to figure out how many eyeballs I could get and where I could put some signs that would make a difference. And so that's where that came from. But that's a lot of cars, 30,000 cars a day going by there. And I'm sure out by the mall on 301, certainly no exception to that. But it would be interesting to see that.
Yeah. So, but other than that, it was really the highlights, I think. And,
Sure.
and well, I will say I appreciate the city now, at least placing the meetings on Facebook Live. I think it gives an opportunity for the broader public to participate. And I think that's the responsibility of the citizens is to know what goes on within their government.
Right, no question about it. And I think that's something that is our responsibility as elected officials. And I think it's also the citizenry's responsibility to understand what's going on, to hold us all accountable.
That's
at
right.
the end of the day.
Accountability and transparency.
Tell you what, Councilman Daughtridge, I appreciate you coming today, and I enjoyed everything you had to say and look forward to having future discussions with you.
All right, Mayor, thank you. I appreciate it.
I understand it's an extremely difficult time for the people of Rocky Mount as our nation and world face this major health crisis. Federal, state, and local officials have been working tirelessly with schools, hospitals, nonprofits to connect Rocky Mount residents with the resources that are available to help them during this pandemic. And here's a list of the top resources that we have put together. For food assistance, please text FOOD-NC to 877-877. This resource is for all children under 18 years old. For mental health support, please call Hope for NC Helpline at 855-587-3463. And thanks to the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, this mental health helpline is available to all North Carolinians 24/7. And if you're a first responder, a healthcare professional, or staff member, or a family member of any of these groups, and you need support for stress, please call the Hope for Healers Helpline at 919-226-2002. This helpline is available 24/7 and will connect the caller with a licensed professional to work through very difficult situations. 211 is available to all North Carolinians with the joint efforts of the state and United Way. An operator will answer your questions and connect you to the right resources related to virus symptoms, housing, meals, unemployment, and more. To receive general information and updates about COVID-19, please text COVID-NC to 898-211. Thank you for all your efforts to maintain social distancing and continually washing your hands. These practices are working, and I want to thank you. We'll come out of this much stronger as a community, and together, we are one Rocky Mount.